Well, hey, don't adjust your televisions, or it's like a Twilight Zone episode here. We're live on a Saturday. Scott and Marshall here with a valid answer. We were not here last week, so we didn't want to miss 2 weeks in a row. So here we are. We're a capitalist conservative pastor and a social liberal atheist get together and talk and discuss and all those kinds of things. Yeah, we didn't really want to miss anything, so that's why we're here on a Saturday instead of tomorrow. I hope you guys were able to catch on with us. We hope we have a little bit of an audience today. Who we put out a post a little bit earlier saying that we were going to go a little bit early. It's been a couple of weeks now, Marshall. How you been?
Oh, I'm doing just fine. I'm enjoying the cool weather. It's a high of 72, unfortunately, today.
You know what? Don't even talk to me about that with it being 99 here in Bakersfield.
Yeah. Well, hey, I heard you guys got a little rain during the week.
Yeah, just enough to make the windows dirty. For about 5 or 6 minutes.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, everything's going well here. And I was gone to Los Angeles last weekend. However, I didn't want to leave folks without going 2 weeks if I could avoid it. So,
well, I think they would have withdrawals. I think they would have
Right?
withdrawals if they didn't have our show for.
You kidding? I have withdrawals. So there you go.
Hey, Josh, I'm glad you caught on with us. He says, man, I thought I'd lost a day. No, we were just doing it a little bit earlier today, but I'm glad you're able to join us in that. So, yeah, so you see on there on the title, if you see the title, they were talking about left and right. Because Marshall, tell us a little bit of a post you put out there saying that the left is not actually the left is actually the center.
Right.
Or is it the right?
No,
I just said left, but then you just said right.
All right. Well,
so it's
there's
right.
Sort of this political spectrum.
It's left, right?
Who's on first, huh? There's a sort of a political spectrum, if you will, and there are some flaws with the whole spectrum.
Yes.
And in fact, a better kind of graph is more of a three-dimensional or at least a two-dimensional plot, which the libertarians use for their little where do you fall on the political scale test.
Right.
But basically, what I'm trying to explain to people is that mainstream Democrats are centrists. They are not leftists, despite what Fox News tells you. People like Biden and Pelosi and Harry Reid are not liberals. They are not even progressive. They are absolutely centrist. They are capitalists. They even people like Obama, not really a liberal, because you look at the 8 years of his administration, what did he really do that's in line with progressivism or actual
well, you could say the same thing about Bush there for 8 years.
You sure could.
What did he actually do?
And that's a clue. That's a clue to everybody.
Well, no, what that's a clue of is the inefficiency of government. That because the Tea Party people went to Congress and they were very, very right, and they weren't able to really accomplish much because the system is so slow to move and so dedicated to incumbents. That's why I'm really liking this whole thing that's coming up with the term limits that everybody keeps talking about. It's like we got to do that, get term limits on Congress, and I think that'll speed up a lot of this and help affect change quicker.
Do you think that people like Obama, Biden, Pelosi, Harry Reid, the leaders of the Democrats, the DNC, Hillary Clinton, do you think those people are actual leftists, or do you see them as centrists?
Absolutely.
Why do you think they're leftists?
Because they're left. Because of the things that they talk about, the things that they or at least their talking points, maybe whether or not they're able to achieve it or actually do it, but everything that they're talking about and everything is very much left, progressive, liberal, off to the left, just as much as people who are on the right are very much to the right.
So who's in the center?
Nobody lives in the center. That's what I'm telling you. Nobody lives in the center. Nobody's in the middle. Everybody has a position that is fundamentally extreme. Everybody has their beliefs that are here. You meet in the center by compromise, by saying, I want this, but I can't get this. So I'll compromise with you and go this far. I want this, but I'll compromise with you and go this far. But people don't live in the middle. People have opinions. People are very opinionated, and people have their beliefs. And then you meet and compromise in the middle. But people don't live in the middle.
Okay, I'm going to give you a pop quiz then. Okay,
Yeah.
let's imagine a scale from 1 to 100.
Yep.
Okay, 50 is dead center. Where would you put, let's say, Donald Trump?
Well, first off, before we can do this, I need to challenge you on something. Since this topic is, since you're the instigator of this topic, that trying to say who's left and who's right, I want to
Nice dodge, but
no.
right,
But
go ahead.
we're gonna get to it, because first
Okay.
we need to define. I need you to define what is the definition of left and what is the definition of right. You and I have to come to terms on what that is before I can tell you what's 100% and what's 50%.
Right. Well, to me, on
Define
the right,
the right.
you have libertarianism, where we basically run things more or less as if it were 1783. You know, we're going back to the year of the Constitution, and we're running things in that fashion. To me, that's the essence of conservatism. Edmund Burke, the father of conservatism, that was his time, that was his era.
But before we even get to that, because you and I have discussed this, that conservative and liberal don't necessarily fall into left and right. Only in America, conservative falls into the right and liberal falls into the
and
left.
that's what
So
we're talking about.
I thought we were talking about left and right, or are we talking about liberal and conservative? Which one are we talking about?
Well, we use them synonymously, right?
But
In the United States,
we shouldn't.
right,
Should we?
conservative are
Should we?
synonymous. Well, to be conservative means to stick with whatever the traditional values, whatever the old ways are best. If you go to China, which most of us would consider to be a very socialist state, in fact, it's communist. It's the most communist nation in the world next to North Korea. It's also our biggest trading partner. But to them, conservatism means sticking to communist traditions, means even, going back to Mao Zedong, going back to Deng Xiaoping and all of that.
So in our discussion, when we're talking about left and right, are we only talking about America, or are we talking about strict left and right?
Yeah, because most of our audience doesn't know a lot of Chinese history in particular.
But I mean, does Europe fall into the same thing?
I'm sorry, what?
Does Europe fall into the same description of right being conservative and left being liberal?
Well, yeah. I mean, you have right-wing conservatism in Europe, and you have left-wing liberalism in Europe as well.
Okay.
But again, I think what
are the conservatives conservative for? What's the old guard that they're trying to maintain?
Well, I would think that my friend Michael Angelo Loncello would be maybe a typical libertarian. And he would be more for going back to the way things were, just 200 years ago. Any move in that direction, probably prior to Roosevelt, would be pleasing to him and other libertarians like that. And he's also pointing out he knows about the Great Leap Forward, and yes, again, that's Chinese history, and I appreciate that Michael knows about that. Most Americans, I think, or at least half, know about the Great Leap Forward, which was a crash industrialization program in China, which led to a famine because all of the people in the rural areas of China were forced to relocate to the cities and go to work in factories, and it caused a mass famine, and something like 5 million people died, or what have you. So it was certainly a humanitarian disaster. It was a gross violation of human rights, and to me, a betrayal of the ideals of communism. Nonetheless, it was successful in industrializing China. And again, today, China is the industrial heart of the entire world.
Because you have to work against socialism to actually get societal progress. So, as China proved with that.
Well, again, socialism is this whole different
which is what they're still proving in that. Trading with the West and maintaining capitalist ideas in order to stay competitive, even though they're they have to eschew their communism in order to survive in the economics of the world.
Well, that's because communism, as it's expressed in China and as it was also expressed in the Soviet Union, is actually what's called state capitalism. Mm-hmm. So. Is it communism? Well, by modern definitions, it is.
Yep.
By a Marxist definition, not necessarily. And most people consider it what's called state capitalism. But
and real quick, just to define
Scotsman here, I don't want to get into a
No,
fallacy.
I'm not going to go that way. But just real quick, just as far as defining terms, is communism socialism? Is it just more extreme, or is socialism more extreme as communism? Is communism on the way to socialism? Is socialism on the way to communism? Or are they actually two different things?
The problem, well, communism is ideally the goal of socialism, but the
Okay.
problem with the way communism has been realized is the workers do not actually own and control the means of production. The party, on behalf of the workers, owns and controls the means of production. On the other hand, what communism has gotten right is this expenditure of tax revenues on the benefits of the people. We see this very well in the Soviet Union. We see it very well in communist China, where your healthcare, your education, your basic
Mm.
needs are subsidized entirely by the government. So they sort of have it half right, but they have it half wrong when it comes to actually democratizing the nation and allowing the actual proletariat to actually have say and power.
Because they wouldn't be competitive if they did
Well, the bottom line
in
is
the world
socialism
market.
is inherently democratic, and we have never seen a democratic socialist state where the people have absolute control over the means of production. We've
Mm-hmm.
not seen that. We do see democratic socialism in countries like in Scandinavia, and
Mm-hmm.
those countries actually perform remarkably well. But you still have a blended system of economics where you still have private property, you still have capitalism in the economic driver's seat, but it's also restrained by socialist ideals. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, there's high taxes, there's strong government regulation, and then the government spends the revenues on the needs of the people. So there's sort of
So high taxes are part of the left.
absolutely they are.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So that would
But
put
they
would
replace
that
high
would
rents under capitalism.
right, but that would definitely put everybody you mentioned at the beginning of this video to the left because they believe in they believe in higher taxes. So they're on the left.
Both right and left believe in both higher taxes, and they're okay
The right doesn't believe in higher
lower
taxes.
wages. So
the right doesn't believe in higher taxes. The right believes in lower taxes.
Right.
That's one of the definitions that defines
that's
them.
what they say, but
I understand that, but I'm saying we're trying to define who's on the left and who's on the right. The right claim to want less taxes and the left claim to want more taxes. Whatever happens in the middle is politics, but what we believe is what we're talking about. And yes, that's why I place them as leftists. That's one of the reasons. They want higher taxes. They want to tax more people and tax higher to pay for more socialist type things. All of them claim that. Everybody on that side of you, Biden, Obama, all of them want to do that. That's why they're on the left.
Okay, but when you take a look at someone like Bernie Sanders, the idea of raising your taxes in order to provide universal health care, it's a net savings to the American public.
Either way,
higher taxes aren't a problem if you get.
Remember, we're not. That's not what we're arguing today. But that's not what we're arguing today.
Okay.
We're talking about what's defining them as left or right. However it works, whatever the process is, and why. That's not what we're talking today. What you're trying to claim that these people are not leftists, and I'm trying to say yes, what they are saying and what they're espousing are leftist ideals. They are leftists. Whether it actually happens and what can get done in politics is not what we're talking about today. We're talking about where do they stand, on the left or right. Like you said, the left believes in higher taxes. The right believes in lower taxes. So when people who are calling for higher taxes to pay for more social programs, that's somebody who's on the left. That's not somebody who's on the right.
We also have to consider how we're defining taxes. If you define taxes merely as money collected by the government to finance government operations, but there are other ways of defining taxes, such as economic rents that are extracted from people to pay for things like healthcare or literal living circumstances, so literal rent and so on.
That's not taxes.
Okay, but Republicans are absolutely okay with this.
Yes, and again, we're not arguing that point. We're not arguing that point today.
But I want to argue it because.
But that's not our topic today. Can we stay on topic?
If your check is written to the federal government
it makes a difference. Yes, it makes a difference. Yes, it makes a difference, and that's not what we're talking about today. Let's stay on topic. Let's stay on topic and talk about what we said we're going to talk about.
Okay, so what's your question, Scott?
Well, we need to define what makes somebody right and what makes somebody left. That's what we're trying. That was one of the things we pulled out. Okay, higher taxes is someone on the left. Lower taxes is somebody on the right.
On the left, it's not just taxes. Here's
I know, but that's one. I'm not.
Gosh. Here's how I define what a real leftist is. Okay, a real leftist advocates for workers to own and control the means of production, which means the workers, not private owners,
Mm-hmm.
own and control the factory. They manage themselves. They manage the factory. They make the big decisions, probably much the way we do it now, but the workers themselves would elect the board members instead of private shareholders. Plus, tax revenues are spent on the benefits of the people, on the things that the people need.
Social
So again,
programs. Yeah.
social programs, yes.
So somebody
So
calling for more social programs is someone on the left.
correct.
Okay.
Now, the question then becomes a matter of degree, because like I said, I wanted to I want to make the point that there are matters of degree. Okay, you can be on the left by only 1 degree. Are you on the left? Sure, but only by 1 degree. Is that really significant? And that's why I want to come at you with the whole comparison of the number scale. Where does Donald Trump fall on the 1 to 100 scale? Where does Obama fall? Where does Biden fall?
Mm-hmm.
And so on. Where do all these political actors fall? Where does Bernie Sanders fall? Where do these people fall? Because you can be, a couple degrees on the right or a couple degrees on the left. You can be 45 or 55, but is that really right or left? Or is that really just kind of around the center?
Well,
So
we're talking about and all those degrees add up is what I'm trying to tell you. Those degrees add up and push them to where they want to go. What they're calling for and where they want to go.
Yeah, are you talking about the Overton window, which is this concept that the ideas that are acceptable to talk about in society then in turn shape the actual policies that follow? So, for example, if one day we can't talk about gay marriage and then suddenly people do start talking about it, that's a shift in the Overton window.
Mm-hmm.
And then lo and behold, what happens, maybe a few years or decades after that is we change.
I'm familiar with the Overton window. I was going to bring that up because that's what this whole thing, that's what I'm trying to challenge, is that what you're trying to say is that leftists aren't really leftists. They're in the center. And what you're trying to do is artificially move the Overton window. You're trying to make a claim that, here's these, there's right and there's left. You're trying to say, no. Let's move that window to show that left are actually in the middle, to show right to be way more extreme. And so they're out of the window. And I believe it's an artificial shift to try to bring these things to say, no, the left is really the center. The left is really the center. And it's an artificial way. No, the left is the left. The right is the right. People who meet in the middle to accomplish things, that's fine. But when you try to move that Overton window to say, no, the left is really center, what it is an artificial way to try to make claim that the other person is extreme. I'm not extreme. I'm in the middle. My beliefs are in the middle. I'm a centrist, but that person is extreme. That's what this is. It's a
not
shift.
No middle.
I know that, but it's an artificial shift of the Overton window to try to claim that those who are really on the left trying to say, well, they're just centrists, to bring more extremism to try to push the idea that the right is more extreme than it actually is.
Let me explain something. The arc of history is almost always to the left. It's always progressive, if you will. We're progressing. What happens is the ideas that are radical for one age become mainstream. We've talked about this, right?
Yeah.
If you were to go back to the 16th or 17th century, the idea of freedom of expression, religious freedom, the idea of economic freedom, these were crazy radical ideas. Equality, women having a voice, furthermore, a vote.
Right, but you can be radical on both sides.
I'm sorry, what?
You can be radical on both sides. Are you saying that the founders of the United States and the Constitution of the United States is leftist?
I am. Well, at one time it was. I'm explaining.
No, it was liberal. As I was saying, it was liberal, but it's not leftist as defined as you're saying. Leftists, they want more social programs. You want more higher taxes. You want larger government. That's not what the founders had. The founders wanted smaller government, limited. So again, you're talking liberal and conservative. I'm talking left and right, and that's where it's different.
I'm trying to explain how history runs here.
I understand
that. Let me finish.
History is, but I'm trying to.
Finish.
Hold on. I'm trying to correct your words. I understand history is liberal, that history is progressive, that we get more progressive as time goes on, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's right or left. As far as it goes from the ideology of socialism and government control and individual freedom and smaller government. That's how I'm defining left and right, unless we're not talking about the same thing.
I'm explaining how the arc of history works. And during the 15th and 16th century, the founding fathers, the ideals that the founding fathers espoused and wrote into the Constitution were at one time radical ideas.
I understand they were
Then
radical,
by the
yes.
19th century, they were mainstream
I understand
ideas.
that, yes.
Now they are conservative ideas. They've
I
moved down
understand
to the
that,
right.
yes.
Okay.
No, no,
So
again, you cannot, you keep saying conservative and right in the same sentence when we've already established that conservative and the right are not the same. That conservative that overall conservatism can be left or right. Just depends on what point in history you're trying to defend.
right.
So don't keep using the
the
same word.
established way of doing things becomes the conservative way of doing things.
Yes, but that could be left or that could be right.
Yes, it could be.
So you keep you keep saying
Okay,
they
I'm
get more
talking
right
about
and it's
the
not more
example of the
conservative.
United States. So even though that is possible, as we've seen in the case of China, I'm speaking in terms of the United States.
Right,
That's
but
why the founding fathers were the original liberals.
they were
That's why
okay,
libertarians call themselves libertarians
right.
or economic liberals.
But that wasn't socialist liberal. That wasn't the left.
Correct. That's not socialism at all. It's
Right.
not left. It was left at
So
the
they weren't
time when it was proposed. In the times of King George III, that was definitely radical leftism. Today, it is now on the far right. It's not
that was
radical right. It's
towards
not
socialism?
alt-right. No, free market ideas, the ideas of equality and liberty, the idea that people get to vote, you don't have a monarch who owns and controls everything.
Yeah.
At one time, that was a radical leftist idea. The founding fathers were radical leftists in their time.
How were they leftist if they weren't pushing for socialism?
Because they were pushing for change in a time prior to socialism. Socialism hadn't even been invented during their time. Socialism wasn't developed until the early 1800s, the early 19th century. Exactly, as Gunderson.
Right. So you're defining it. You're defining it based on the original left and right that took place in France. That the left were these people and the right were those people, and the left were the capitalists and the right were the monarchists.
Correct. At one time, capitalism was the left of the existing political spectrum, but then with time, new political ideas pushed the spectrum further to the left, further out into socialism.
So authoritarian, what is it? Authoritarian monarchies is right?
Yes, those were your Tories. Those are Tories. There's a name for them, Tories, and they still have a Tory party today. But during the time of King George, the Tories were the people who were generally loyal to the king, and the Whigs were your liberals. They were the social liberals who believed that people should have rights and votes and economic freedom and so on. Mm-hmm. So your Whigs were the progressive party of 18th century England. So today,
so you're saying that the spectrum of left and right, far right is monarchy.
Correct. It depending on what time
period. It's not
period,
fascism, it's monarchy.
What time? Well, they didn't have fascism necessarily during the 19th century.
So why are we still using those words then?
Why are we doing what?
Because the right does not believe in authoritarianism or monarchy. That is not the direction of the current right, of what we call the right in the United States. Does not when you go as far as you can towards the right in the United States, you do not get to monarchy.
Well, you could if somebody were advocating, monarchy and absolute, obedience to the king. The king owns and controls everything. He should be an absolute monarch.
But that's not an argument for the right. That argues for smaller government.
Well, today, the way we see it, argues for smaller government. And as Michael's pointed out, so communism could be right-wing if it lasted long enough. And theoretically, yes, that's what we see in China. In fact, that's why in China they have removed Mao Zedong from the campus and replaced him with Edmund Burke. They're having students read Edmund Burke, which is conservatism, because they don't want people to have the idea that, hey, let's rebel, which was all about Mao. They want people to read Burke, which is, hey, let's just have slow, incremental internal change. Don't kill the state.
Yeah.
Let's let the state be, and we'll just change it slowly
So
and
so
incrementally.
that's where the issue exists right now, because you're defining left and right as it was in the past, not as it is now.
Again, the time period and the place in question matter.
Yeah, so
So
right
that's why I
here,
want to talk
right
about the
here,
United States today.
exactly. So the United States today, right here, right now, what the right believes is one thing, what the left believes is another. You can't keep bringing in what the left originally was for, what the left is. We're talking about the United States right now. That the right does not believe that the right in the United States does not lead towards bigger government and monarchy. The right, I mean, honestly, if you go all the way right, you're probably gonna get to anarchy, which is no government.
Well, you have left anarchy as well. It's called anarcho-socialism or what have
Yeah,
you. So there's anarchy on both the right and the left.
but I mean, if you go hard right, you're getting to less and less and less government and less authoritarianism. You're getting to
Well,
more and more individual freedom, to where the point it's just straight up, survival of the fittest if you go all the way right.
if we're speaking in terms of the United States,
United States, yes, we are. Yes.
and today,
Yes, that's what we're doing.
but you could also go so far to the right that you go into monarchy or fascism. But fascism, for example,
Well,
belongs on its own little thing
that'll
because
only
fascism
happen.
can incorporate some ideas of socialism.
Yeah, but that's only because you get that becomes the anytime you get to monarchism and fascism stuff like that, that's all built on a charismatic leader. That's all built on the emotions
Well,
of a charismatic leader and how they take
theoretically, but in reality, no. A king doesn't have to be charismatic. A king simply has to be born.
No.
It's
Hold on.
divine right of kings.
The first king who establishes the kingdom has to
Mhm.
be the charismatic person. To go so far right that you go to where there's no government, and then somebody steps in and says there's too much chaos, we're going to set, and then that's a charismatic person and people follow, they set, and then suddenly you are now, boom, you're on the left, authoritarian, and that's where the switch happens. It's the same thing that happens, when it's what happens when you get a charismatic leader, is that it takes them to authoritarianism. That it is the charismatic leader that brings you there. Now, after that, once that charismatic leader sets up the rules that they want, then yeah, a king just has to be born. But to take you from no kingdom to a kingdom, most of the time that's from a charismatic leader who is essentially usually duping everybody. So
Okay.
that's what I'm talking about. Is like right now, when we want to talk about the right in the United States right now, then yes, all those names that you mentioned are leftists.
Okay,
Because
so
that's what I'm trying to say. They are leftists.
so where do you put some Republican politicians of your choosing on that scale? With 50 being the center, where do you put some? Call out a Republican politician and tell me where you would
Man,
assign him
if I
on the scale.
if I knew that many,
Just two or three. Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz,
Ted Cruz, I would say is probably
Mitch McConnell.
it's like Marco Rubio and Mitch McConnell. I hear about them on the news, but I don't know much about them. I don't watch them. I don't follow them. I don't. They're to me
Donald
they're
Trump.
they're,
How
they're
about Donald
politicians.
Trump?
Donald Trump. I'll start with Ted Cruz. I think Ted Cruz is probably 75, 80 towards the right,
Okay.
or if it's, which I don't know where 0 is and where 100 is, where you're putting that. So, but definitely way off to not center.
What about
Donald Trump? Probably, man, as much as he talks about it, I think his mouth is probably about the same, 75, 80. How much of it he actually believes, I'm not real sure. Maybe more 60. But
what about what he does versus what he says?
Well, I think what he does is very right, not like correct, but
80, 90,
right.
100?
No, probably still say not as far as Ted Cruz. Probably 60, 70. I'd put somebody like Ted Cruz like 70, 80. Mm-hmm. I'd put somebody like just from the things that I've seen posted by the what is the guy, the ex-Navy SEAL with the eye patch. He's probably
Crenshaw?
Crenshaw. I'm assuming he'd be like an 80 or 90 to the right.
What about Ronald Reagan? We need a soundboard where when I say Ronald Reagan, you hear the choir of angels.
Oh, yeah,
He's such an icon of the right, but I mean, everybody compares themselves to Ronald Reagan.
yeah. Um,
Everybody claims to be a Reagan conservative. Where would you put Reagan?
I think the things that Reagan talked about and said, I would definitely put him in the 70 to 80 range. What ended up happening during his presidency didn't go as far, but I would definitely put him in that range.
Uh,
Of the quotes and the things that he talked about and the beliefs that he have and the size of the size of government and taxes and personal ownership and the Second Amendment and rights on that and all those kind of things, definitely I'd put him much more on the right, probably even than Donald Trump.
what about H.W. Bush? W.
W. Wait, which one?
9/11 Bush.
9/11 Bush. Um, yeah, probably in the 60, 70 range.
Okay. How about let's go to the left now.
Yeah,
Where would you put Obama?
60 or 70 the other way, or whatever you call it, 30,
Well,
30,
one
40, whatever.
is basically, maybe Trotsky or something. One is pretty far to the left there. Uh,
I'm talking like 50% center, so I'm
you
going
want to
50 and going
go
up.
low numbers for these guys. So
Well,
where
for comparison's sake, because it's tough for me to do the math. I mean, well, if it was 60% that way, then it's what, 40% this way, or is it? I'm just going to say 50's in the middle, and then 60 towards the
Yes.
right, or 60 towards the left. Is that fine? Can we do that?
Well, that would just be 40 on the left.
Right, but for me the numbers, like if I said 30
Okay.
or 40 over
Okay.
here, doing the transposing, I'm like,
All right.
oh, what does that end up being? Like, is that 20? Is that 18? Is that I just for comparison's sake in my mind, I'm just going to say use the same numbers but in a different direction if that's okay. Sorry about that, everybody, but
Okay.
my
So
numbers brain doesn't
Okay,
work
so
that
you
well.
want to rank your liberals from 50 to 100, with 100 being Leon Trotsky, where the whole planet should be engulfed in a communist proletariat revolution. The workers
Yeah,
should
and
control the means of
I would
production.
put AOC and Bernie Sanders in the 90, close to that.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
And what about Obama?
Like I said, 60 or 70.
60 or 70? What
Yeah.
about Biden?
Uh, right now, Biden's moving more 70, 80 to me.
What about Nancy Pelosi,
When
Speaker of the House?
when she's not senile, yeah, probably same 70, 70, 80.
70, 80, 70,
Yep.
80.
Not as far
So,
as like Bernie Sanders, or again, you look at some of the candidates that are coming up now, Warren and Harris. I'm putting them in the 70, 80, 90 range.
wow.
Yep.
Now, what if I told you that Bernie Sanders is still a capitalist?
That's fine. I don't care. He's still a leftist. He's still way on the left and wants leftist things.
Way on the left, huh?
Yes.
So what are some of these leftist things that these extreme radical leftists want?
So I see the right, the fundamentals of the right are personal property rights.
Yeah.
Let's see, individual freedom trumps
State control.
state control.
Central control. Yeah.
It's absolutely smaller government. Also, I believe, again, on the right is the idea that there is a supreme authority that is outside of the
God.
Yeah, there's a supreme authority,
Okay.
and there are absolute morals that supersede what government says, and that government should follow those rules. That the government rules should not supersede the rules, the supreme rules that exist. I believe that for that reason, government should be smaller, and I believe people on the right believe that government should be smaller. There should be less taxes and more individual freedom, and effectively, people on the left believe that human beings are the supreme authority, and that there are smarter human beings who should decide how everybody else lives. That's an idea on the left, that there is no supreme authority outside of mankind. So mankind should the smart versions of mankind should define how the rest of mankind should live.
Mm.
and that's a very left ideology, as I see
Hmm.
it. That and to do that, you need, since mankind and government is the supreme authority, government should be bigger to make sure that everybody cooperates with what government says should be done. So it's more
Mm.
authoritarian, less freedom, less individual freedom, more control.
Hmm. So, what if I told you that there was a version of the far left that you have not hit on yet?
Okay.
Okay, what if I told you there's a version of the left that believes in absolute democratic participation of the people? In other words, the majority rules,
Mm-hmm.
but with frank exceptions as outlined in a Bill of Rights.
Mm-hmm.
There is absolutely nobody in United States Congress or even running for office that advocates for workers to own and control the means of production. Now, that's the real left. But yet you're putting people like Bernie Sanders on the 90% of the scale,
Mm-hmm.
which blows my mind. I mean, somebody like Bernie, I might put him at like 70, but even in Europe, if Bernie Sanders were to go to Europe, these
We're
are
not
these
talking
are
about we're not talking
mainstream.
about Europe. We're talking about the
Okay,
United States
but
right
to
here,
give
right
you an
now.
idea of how radical these people are,
Mm-hmm.
the proposals that people like AOC and Bernie Sanders are pitching are standard ideas like universal health care all around the world. It's not even just in Europe,
I
it's on
don't
the whole
care about
planet.
all around the world. I
I
care about the
know, but
United States
I need
right now.
you've got
That's
to
what we're
open your
talking about.
eyes because the
But that's
problem
not.
is
But again,
Fox News has put
that's not.
blinders on you.
No, but that's not the topic we're talking about. That's not the subject we're talking about. We're talking about left and right in the United States right now. I thought you and I established that.
Okay, so my point is the left in the United States is not nearly as radical as it could be, at least not the elected left, not the people running for
And let's
office.
keep it that way.
Okay, so why are you putting somebody like Bernie Sanders at like 90, AOC
Because
at
he
90?
is in the United
They're
States.
still capitalists. They don't
In the
advocate
United
for
States, they are.
and they aren't even they're certainly not proposing that we go out and behead all the landlords. They're not advocating that we basically seize all the wealth on Wall Street and redistribute it to the
Yes, they are
people.
talking about that. Yes,
No,
people
no,
like
they're not.
AOC are talking about stuff like that.
No, they're not. They're talking about canceling student debt, which it's going to get canceled one way or the other because it certainly can't be repaid.
I'm sorry,
So,
you didn't read the Green New Deal from her?
yeah, I'm
That's
familiar with
what they're calling
the New
for.
Deal.
That is what they want. They cannot
No,
get there right now, but that
they're
is what they
asking
want.
corporate America to reduce carbon emissions. But again, it's still capitalist. They're not asking for the overthrow and the end of capitalism and putting the workers in control of the workplace. Nobody running for office is advocating that. But there is a real live left that advocates that. So when you put somebody like Bernie or AOC at 80, 90%, and you say that the scale ends there, like Fox News does, and when you take somebody like Nancy Pelosi, who is maybe just a 10, she won't even consider impeaching Donald Trump, you are ignoring the fact that there is a much more robust and vigorous left out there that wants much more radical ideas to be implemented. And everybody's talking about Nancy Pelosi like she's some sort of leftist radical, like she's the
Mhm.
next Joseph Stalin. When really the fact is, when these people are in office, as they have been for the past 5 decades,
Yep.
we haven't seen a darn thing change in this country. This country has not moved left. The only major move to the left that we've seen in the past 50 years, I can identify three. One, legalization of abortion in 1973, Roe v. Wade, or was it four, whatever. The second is Obamacare. And the third was, heck, I forgot what the third was. Oh, a gay marriage. And that is the only move to the left that we've seen in this country in the past 50 years. Otherwise, we've actually seen a dial back, a reduction of taxes. Taxes have been reduced even under people like Bill Clinton, who was supposed to be some kind of liberal.
Mhm.
We've seen the Clinton,
But again,
Bill and Hillary
taxes
actually
were raised.
gay
Taxes
marriage.
were raised under Reagan. Sometimes those again.
Right?
But I'm saying that's when you have to compromise in the middle. That's not what they want. Bill Clinton didn't want lower taxes. Ronald Reagan didn't want higher taxes. Not
That
what they
they
pushed
tell
for.
you.
But that's what they have to
tell you.
compromise to in the middle.
That's what they
That's
tell
what's
you.
in the middle.
But at the end of the day, when you look at the voting record and you look at the deals these people broker, they are all in the center within 10 or 20 points of each other. And that's what I'm trying to illustrate here. There are people on the far radical right that actually want fascism, and nobody's talking
See,
about
how is
them.
fascism on the
The
right?
far, well,
Define
technically,
it.
if
How is
it's
fascism on the American right?
well, because it's a conservative ideology that wants to go back to the way things were in the 50s, the 40s, and even to the 19th century. It advocates cultural superiority, genocide,
How is
other.
cultural superiority a thing of the right?
Well, fascism. It's a component of fascism.
Right,
So
that's
fascists
right, right.
believe.
But that's circular reasoning. You literally just said fascism is fascism because it wants because it wants national. You literally said fascism is fascism because it wants this. I said, well, how do you define that as being right? He said, well, that's on the right because it's part of fascism. You literally just
Okay,
did circular reasoning.
Let me clarify. Okay, a key component of fascism is either ethnic or cultural superiority.
Cool. Now, why are you putting ethnic or cultural superiority on the right? Why does that fall on the right?
Because traditionally, ethnic and cultural superiority are closely associated with militarism and with traditional ways of doing things. They pull from the past. They pull ideas, particularly myths, from the past. They pull conservative ideals and make these things sacrosanct and tell people we have to go back to the way things were. We have to go back to the good old days where first there was segregation, then ultimately slavery, and maybe even genocide, which is what we've seen here in the United States, by the way. But when you look at Mussolini, and in particular when you look at Adolf Hitler, that was what they advocated, which was a return to the German ideal, even though it was a mythical ideal. Where what throws people off when it comes to fascism is there are socialist components to fascism. They do believe in providing for the basic needs of the people.
Well,
How,
all fascism
however,
is socialism for this group of people.
precisely.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. That's not all it is. It's also cultural or ethnic superiority. So you have to put that on top of it. That's how you get a specific group of people are entitled to the benefits, but everyone else is excluded.
So what I'm trying to find out is why is ethnic superiority part of the right? Why are you making that part of the definition of the
Well,
right?
because when you take a look at the historic right in the United States, going all the way back to the founding fathers, and perhaps coming as far up as the 1960s, the conservative right, which today is embodied in Republicans and was previously embodied in Democrats until the 1950s, because the Republican Party was progressive up until the 50s, but actually the 30s, 50s New Deal era, it switched lanes.
30s or 50s?
Yet between the 30s and the 50s with FDR and all of that. So
Who was a Democrat?
Right, FDR
So was Wilson. So was Wilson, which is
Wilson,
the tins and the teens. He was
right.
he was
Wilson,
socialist.
Wilson was a legendary racist.
Right. So
Okay.
that's and also a socialist.
But remember, your Democrats,
and also pushing for socialism on the left.
Democrats in the time of Ronald Reagan. Well, again, it's fascism because he advocated for the benefits, but it wasn't necessarily for everyone. So during the time of Abraham Lincoln.
So Wilson was fascist.
Well, yeah, there's certainly some components to it. He screened the first movie with audio in the White House, and it was the Klan movie, the KKK movie. What's it called? Birth of a Nation.
Yeah, Birth of a Nation.
Yeah. So, holy cow. Okay. During the time of Lincoln, Republicans were the progressive party. During the time of Roosevelt, and I'm talking the first Roosevelt, Republicans were the progressive party. And then around the time of FDR, they switched lanes economically, and Democrats became the economic progressives. Republicans then subsequently became the racial old way of doing things. But you had to, again, it wasn't.
But again,
there wasn't one day where they just switched positions. It was over a period of time.
But what I'm trying to,
also racist.
Right. But what I'm trying to show is that racism is not a left or right thing. It's a human thing.
Okay,
you're trying to define it as a definition of the right is to be racist.
Right. Yes, it's much more associated with the right. I think, to be fair, we need to put fascism on its own third axis.
Mhm.
So rather than a spectrum, which is right and left, we should think in terms of a triangle, with fascism at one point of the triangle, drawing ideas from both the right and the left into its own thing.
Mhm.
So,
Because
yeah.
I don't see the values of the right when you get to the extreme right, the values of the actual right, as getting to fascism. Smaller government, less
Hmm.
taxes, more individual freedom. How does that get to fascism?
Hmm. Well,
That's
there are arguments that capitalism uses fascism to protect itself from the left. But again, I don't want to get into that right now because again, we're going down a completely
yeah.
different path for today's discussion where now we're arguing, you own fascism. No, you own it. When
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think the fact is you do not own fascism. I do not own fascism. There are people who may own fascism, but it's not me or you.
Yeah.
So
But it's
I
not
think
again, I don't think that it's left or right.
I'm
I think
agreeing with you.
yeah,
I'm
I think
agreeing
what you're
with you.
saying is that it's a
It's
yeah.
on its own third axis. So there you go.
Yeah.
So
So again, anybody who is pushing for control over others based on the needs of society and that this is how everybody should live, therefore we need to create a government to make sure everybody lives this way, that's leftist. That's what I'm
well,
saying. That's
again,
leftist to me.
socialism is inherently democratic. That's how it's supposed to be. We have not necessarily seen that when you look at China or the USSR, but when you look at Scandinavia, we do see it that way. And certainly, it's very hard to argue that the status quo in the United States, whether a Republican or a Democrat is in control, is any way democratic. The everyday person in the United States does not have a voice in politics in the United States, not anymore. And then when you look at the Electoral College, you see that a person in Wyoming has 3 times the voting power of a person in California. So at the end of the day,
Which is a
democracy
good
in the
thing.
United States is not working. It is not working. It is certainly not effective. The United States has become an oligarchy where the wealthy have the power. So the United States is certainly not democratic either.
All right. Well, on that note, again, I think you and I have come to the same conclusion that term limits will solve so many things.
They will help, but I don't think that's the end of the
Well, they
story.
won't solve everything. I said they'll
We have
solve
to
so
take the
many
money.
things.
We have to take the
Yeah.
money out of the politics. That's even more important than term limits. I agree with term
Well,
limits, but
term limits, I think, are the step towards that. I don't think you can get there. I think you got it backwards. I think you want to go here. I think term limits is the
maybe one
step,
or the other.
is a closer
Sure,
step to get there. I think it's the
sure.
first
But
step.
understand,
It's
be
not the
very
goal. It's
clear.
not the end goal.
But be very clear that on the left, it's about organizing people, those people having a democratic voice in how they are governed. There would be
Right,
frank
but there,
exceptions
but
because you're
on the
talking
right,
about
hold on,
the
no,
tyranny of the majority on the
right,
left is what
right,
you're alluding to. And the
yes,
left would not have tyranny of the majority because there would still be a Bill of Rights. There would be frank exceptions.
right. Frank
Any,
exceptions written by the people who are in charge, which is still a tyranny of the majority, and the democracy and voting exists on both sides. I'm not going to let you say that the left represents democratic choices. The right represents democratic choices. The right represents more democratic choices because it's more about what's your choice, your individual freedom. Because ultimately, in the end, when you have the left, you keep saying, well, it's not the government. It's democratically chosen. Yes, it's a government built on the majority, and now it is a tyranny of the majority, with the
well,
power
again,
to make the minority do what the majority wants. Whereas the
okay.
right says, here's this, but there's a limit to that power. There's a
And
limit to that power.
why cannot the left do exactly the same thing as they have clearly done in other countries? In fact, socialist countries like in Scandinavia
They're
are
not socialist
way more
countries.
progressive than the United States is. Way more progressive. Even the Soviet Union and China, in some ways, way more progressive than the United States is. They've had sexual equality, they've had gender equality in those countries, they've had universal health care. They are way more progressive than the United States in many respects. So I don't get this whole thing where, well, people won't have rights on the left. Since when? Some people on the left have had more rights than people have today in the United States. If you go to Scandinavia, you can gay marry like that. Whereas here in the United States, apparently, it's still subject to debate.
Hmm.
So people do not have more rights here in the United States, but somehow we're so far on the right compared to them. So no,
Yeah,
I object that
there's a lot of things you cannot do
the
in
left can
socialism states.
the left can absolutely have a Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights do exist in leftist countries, and they are enforced, and it's not just tyranny of the majority all day long.
That's where it leads. Yes.
No, in
Yes,
fact,
that's what socialism is. That's what it is. It is tyranny of the majority.
no,
It's
you're redefining socialism to create a straw man that you can knock down, and I'm
but
not
that's
going
but that's
to.
but that's what it is.
No,
It's
that's not
just you.
what it
It's
is.
just you. The countries you're pointing to are so homogenous that everybody just naturally agrees anyway. So it looks like everybody's living in harmony.
How are
And
they
there is
homogenous that they're filled with human beings?
no. They're homogenous in their culture. They are very homogenous in their culture.
Really? So you go to a place like Sweden, for example, which has a
Which
fast-growing Muslim majority, has people of all ethnicities,
no,
you know, and what does
when you measure it, go and measure it. It is still 80-90% a certain type of culture and they're having more problems as more cultures are coming in. That's actually creating more problems in those countries, and it's creating more disturbance and more chaos, like you have in the United States. The United States is one of the most mixed, non-homogenous cultures in the world. And you're comparing homogenous cultures of people who generally already agree on the same thing and trying to say, look, it's not tyranny of the majority. They're all living great. Yeah, because they mostly all agree. They are already mostly the majority. There's a very small minority that you're not, and even that small minority,
I think
is so close and homogenous to them that there's not, that you're not seeing the difference. When you have a mixture of people like you have in the United States, it is much more difficult to see to where the tyranny of the majority is much more defined because you have
I think
such a
in the
spread
United
in
States we are
people.
way more homogenous than you think. Most Americans love
No,
their Social Security. They love their social programs. Most
look
Americans
it
want
up.
universal health care. Most Americans want to ease the burden on college graduates. Most Americans agree that the Chicago Bears suck and that the Dodgers are going to win the World Series. Most Americans like hamburgers and apple pie and pizza. Most Americans are culturally identical in many key respects. So I don't get this
But
idea
not
that somehow
politically.
we are somehow
Not
this.
politically.
No, but my point that I'm trying
And
to
that's
make.
what politics is. When we're talking about policies, when we're talking about government, it's about where
The
people stand
differences
politically, not what
between
food they eat, not
the
whether or not they all like
differences
hamburgers and pizza.
the functional difference, regardless of the stated difference, but the functional difference between 90% of all of our elected officials is virtually zero. That's why I'm telling you, everybody on the right and everybody on the left are within 10 or 20 points of each other. They're all capitalists. They're all purchased by the same corporations. They all make these public displays of disagreement over tiny issues like the immigration issue and abortion issue and the gun issue. They make these to be the biggest issues that could ever come up in the United States. But over the past 50 years, none of those issues have you ever seen change in one direction or another? Even when Republicans, for example, control the White House, the House, and the Senate, or Democrats vice versa,
Mm-hmm.
you have never seen substantial change movement on any of these fronts. And that's because they are all part of the same incestuous cabal. And all of the whole he's right, he's left, he's a fascist, he's a communist, he's a radical, that's just political theater staged in the public eye to keep us at each other's throats. But at the end of the day, whether you vote Republican or Democrat, it's not going to make a big difference to your daily life in this country.
It will make a difference. It will absolutely make a
Good luck.
difference.
Yeah. I'm still waiting. I'm waiting for that difference after 50
Yeah,
years of life.
yeah. It's
I'm
very,
waiting for
very,
that
it's very,
difference.
very slow. It's very,
Yeah,
very,
it is.
it's very, very
Exactly.
slow.
That's
But we are
intentional.
slowly losing our rights as individuals to the left, and I'm
Really?
going to fight that.
Really?
Absolutely.
Really? And what about the rights of African Americans, women, gays? These people are still struggling for some kind of rights. How are they losing rights? If anything, they've slightly gained rights. But at the end of the day, no, we're not losing rights in this
Yes.
country. We've never had rights in this country unless you are a white male white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male, you
You can go.
right
You can go and keep going on your apologetic whiteness if you want to.
yeah.
That's fine. You can go ahead and and try to make yourself look so much better because look, see, I'm a white man who's not wanting to be white. So don't be mad at me. You
Well,
can keep doing that.
what rights did blacks have 150 years ago? What rights did they have even 50 years ago?
50 years ago, the same as they have now.
Well, okay. And when you consider that we were just coming off segregation,
and 50 years ago,
that
before all of these socialist programs, the black community was on the rise. Then you introduce socialist programs in the 60s and 70s, and that's what has kept the black community down. Not the laws, not the freedoms in the law, but the social programs.
Okay,
the social programs have kept that. So yeah, we've gone 55 minutes. We've gone 55. We've gone 10 minutes over 55 minutes. Sorry about that. But yeah, this has been a valid answer, or somebody said an invalid answer. So okay. Normally it's Sundays at 5. We had to do today Saturday, so we'll be back next Sunday at 5 with Scott and Marshall. Until next time, let me get this here. I gotta produce my own show here. I'm Scott.
And I'm Marshall.
All right, you guys have a great weekend.
Thank you.
All right.